Welcome back to Extra Holiday Games. I'm Extra Holiday, and I still don't remember what the instance was where I was just thinking about a thing in D&D, and then it ended up implementing it, even though I didn't think about it like while I was planning the game, like actually writing stuff down, you know. So, I still don't remember. Granted, for me, it's only been like 10 seconds since the end of the last episode. For you, it's probably been 2 days. But yeah, I don't remember. So, yeah, I guess we're just gonna leave that be for now. Oh, I think it might have been actually. No, it wasn't that. I was gonna say it might have been the Lost Woods idea, which kind of relevant for this. Also, in my setting, it probably should refer to it as the Fey Woods, because that's what it's called, and it's definitely not the Lost Woods, because that's what me taking inspiration from other things for my D&D campaign. What are you talking about? It's not like the inspiration for me becoming a DM again was someone else's D&D campaign or anything. Point is, the Fey Woods, I was gonna say, might have been the one that I had a method for, and then implemented differently because I had more time to think about it. But yeah, I don't think that's actually the case. I think the Fey Woods was always going to be like a Lost Woods type of, oh, you got to figure out which direction you go, and if you go the wrong way, you get teleported back to the beginning, because that's how that worked out. Man. I'm going to spend this entire episode grinding and trying to think of what that was. These guys are only giving 10 per, so I don't know if I actually want to grind here. These guys give 20? Yeah. I don't think this is the best grinding spot. I don't want to grind in the plains because that's Octorok City. Not Octorok, Tektite. God damn. Still mixing that up. And these guys who are annoying as... Ow. Because they drop the things straight down, and the only way to hit them is by jumping straight up. I don't know what's happened in D&D. Ow. Actually, I think... Oh, you know what? I think it might have actually been the whole Flora Lorette cherry tree idea that I talked about, I think, in another episode of this series, where, I was like, okay, this town Flora Lorette, what's it like? Oh, it's got a big cherry tree in the middle because it's, druids and fancy trees and lots of different colors and stuff. I believe I explained it either in this series or probably in Minecraft, if not. Point is, I think that was actually the product of, like, we were supposed to play one weekend and then it got delayed, and then between the time that it got delayed and the weekend that we actually played, I was like, oh, hey, this is actually a great idea for this town. And so theoretically, delays do actually make, regardless of whether I actually put a whole bunch of time into working on D&D between sessions, the delays still make for better sessions because I just think about, what could happen in the next session. And that means I'm more prepared, I get better ideas, and it turns out better. So, yes, more time will make a better campaign, basically, but I don't. It's possible. Okay, we're using life now, but there's probably an upper limit to that, and also, I don't know. It's still kind of disheartening when you're like, okay, we're all gonna play this weekend, right? And they're like, actually, I got something else to do, so... It's very hard to get a group of adults together for anything, really. Especially when they're young adults who are all working on different work schedules because most of us are working part-time jobs. And you can't get a consistent schedule on a part-time job for the most part. Let alone, you know, a normal Monday through Friday. That is a luxury reserved for full-time employment. Which I am not yet at. Which reminds me, there's an application I meant to try and do again. It was weird because I went to the site to apply for the job, and the job was listed. I was like, okay, I'm gonna hit the apply now button. I hit the apply now button, and then I went and I made an account on the site that it took me to, and it's like, okay, cool. And then I went and looked at the job listings on that second site that the first site took me to, and the job was not there. Which I don't know what to make of that. And mind you, this is a pretty reputable company that I was applying to, so it's not like oh, it's just it's you know, a shoddy small business website. Like, no, this was a major corporation whose job site apparently doesn't work that well. No. But yeah, I'm gonna see if I can't actually apply to that position again, because it would be a solid job. It would be enough for me to move out of my parents' house, which would be nice, and it would probably give me a more steady schedule than I have now. So I'm gonna give it a shot. Ew, dick. Cool. All right. Yeah. Cool. Gotcha. Yeah. This grinding relatively easy. Right. This is probably about as much as I can handle. Yeah. And you know what? If it takes me some time to do it, I don't mind. Yeah. Because I would rather do this than, you know, beat my head against the wall of invisible enemies in lava. You know? I just noticed a spot on the map that might be important. So I actually feel like I'm gonna maybe go check it. I kinda doubt that it's anything, but there's a chance, you know? There's a chance, and you know what? It's still in the forest, so I don't really have to risk myself going out into the plains or anything. Ooh, taking that. So there's really not much to lose. If I run into an encounter, then I can just use that opportunity to grind. Oh, yeah. Okay, there's a fairy here. That's pretty neat. Not exactly what I was looking for, but... Okay, yeah, no, nothing there. Cool. That's fine. Ow. That was kind of pathetic getting hit there, but it's fine. Alright. Theoretically, you know what? Maybe. No, I want to stick to this forest. I was thinking, like, I haven't explored every tile of this area, the area that, you know, corresponds to the 5th and 6th, or 4th and 5th palaces. So maybe I do go exploring a little bit, but, like, also I don't want to, because that means I have to deal with the plains and caves and maybe a little bit of desert. The desert's not so bad, but I'll at least explore every tile of this forest. You know, I'll do that much diligence. God. Ah, man. I was doing some reading today, specifically for D&D, because I was like, I haven't worked on D&D in a while, I should at least do something related, right? So I started reading spells. I read up on the spells that the characters in the current party will get at their next level of spells. And so now I'm at least familiar with those spells. That's pretty... which I think is pretty neat, you know? And... I also read through some, you know, magic items, you know, because I've been trying to work my way through the list just to know what's out there, because I don't want to be reinventing the wheel, right? If as much as I like to homebrew, I don't like to homebrew something and then figure out that it's like exactly the same as something that already exists, as kind of happened with. Okay, it didn't exactly happen with the Way of the Piercing Wind Monk that I made, which is a subclass. I might have explained it before, but it's a subclass of monk based on throwing things. And I just kind of had the epiphany one day of like, wait a minute. Ranged monk, like, you know, like mid-range monk, I should say, because that long-range monk isn't really too much of a thing. I guess you could do it with a Kensei monk, but, you know, whatever. A mid-range monk, doesn't the Sun Soul monk do that? And I looked at it. I looked at the Sun Soul monk, and I looked at the Way of the Piercing Wind monk. I died again. And I was like, oh, yeah, from levels 3 to 6, the Way of the Piercing Wind monk is pretty much just a worse Sun Soul monk. And so I was like, probably gonna have to do something about that. Because, right, thematically they're different, right? Because the Sun Soul monk is all about shooting ki blasts, you know? And they get like a Kamehameha later. They don't call it that because copyright, but they get like various ki attacks that deal radiant energy, and they're ranged, which is something that monks usually don't have. And so the Way of the Piercing Wind monk, you know, based on thrown items, is also a mid-range monk, because, you know, most of the time the thrown items you're throwing have a range of like 20-30 feet as their normal range. The exception, I think, is the javelin, which I think is 60, I want to say, for its normal range. But yeah, you've got your Sun Soul monk, which shoots ki blasts, which you don't run out of, by the way. It doesn't like cost ki points or anything, at least not for the basic ki blast. And they've got better range, I believe, than like a dart, because a dart's 30 feet and the ki blast, or a dart's 20, I believe, and the ki blast is 30, if I remember right. But the point is, Sun Soul monk has better range, and they have better, and they don't lose their item when they make their ranged attack. They don't lose an item, right? Because when you throw a dagger, it's not in your hand anymore, right? So, and that's kind of one of the downfalls of a thrown weapon fighting style. But they, yeah, so the Sun Soul monk is basically just better at that point. Like, there is a point where that the Way of the Piercing Wind monk is arguably better, but that's like super late game when they can burn all their ki to make 64 attacks in a round. Because, you know, that's kind of the ludicrous ability that I thought you should probably have in the end game. Oh, one other reason the Sun Soul monk is better at low levels is because their attacks are radiant damage, and that counts, and there are way more things that resist piercing damage, which is what the Piercing Wind monk would do, than resist radiant damage. So yeah, overall Sun Soul monk is better at low level, and maybe the Piercing Wind monk is better at high level. But in terms of playstyle, they play pretty much the same, right? They're like a monk who wants to be not right up close, but like mid-range. And like they can go up close if they want, but it's not really their style. So yeah, I'm gonna have to do a little bit of modifying to that super special custom subclass, because it's a little awkward. And I'm not exactly sure how I'm gonna do it yet. because I really don't have much more inspiration for the class, or like much more, or for the subclass, or much more theme to it than just throwing a bunch of at the enemy. So I'm gonna have to give it some thought. Maybe look for some inspiration on, you know, how to make that better without A, making it overpowered, and B, just cranking the numbers up way too high. Well, I guess those are kind of the same thing that I just said twice, but perhaps you get what I mean. Now, make it interesting and different enough from the Sun Soul Monk that someone would choose it not just based on the numbers. Choose one over the other, not just based on the numbers, I should say. And the theming. Right? Make them mechanically different. Now, I should heal because I think that the eyeball guys do like a full bar of health when they hit, which is kind of silly, considering I am at maximum life. Okay. Yeah, I'll figure something out. But for now, we're tabling that subclass because it needs a bit of work before it actually becomes something worth existing, basically. Because there's really no point to me having the Piercing Wind Monk if it's not mechanically different. If it doesn't feel different than the Sun Soul Monk. Right, because there's the theme of it, right? And that it lends to feel a little bit, but like the gameplay feel, you know? And it's... You don't tend to think too much about gameplay feel when you're talking about D&D, but it exists, right? Like, you know, you can tell the difference between, you know, a sorcerer and a barbarian because, well, the sorcerer is going to be in the back flinging spells while the barbarian is going to be up front, you know, slashing away. And you can even tell the difference between, you know, different types of, you know, let's say, different subclasses of... We'll use sorcerer again. Different subclasses of sorcerer because, well, a divine soul sorcerer might, you know, be slinging healing spells at their allies, while a draconic sorcerer might actually be up in the front, you know, casting touch spells at the enemy. Or, you know, shooting... Well, I don't think the dragon or draconic sorcerer gets a fire breath. I think because the dragonborn race gets that. I don't think the sorcerers do, but I don't remember. Point is, for, I believe, most of the classes and subclasses of 5th edition D&D, they all kind of feel a little different, at least. And so far, the Piercing Wind Monk and the Sun Soul Monk feel... I feel like, again, this hasn't been play tested because nobody's played as Piercing Wind Monk yet, but I feel like they would play pretty much identically, at least until level 6, which is a long while, because I'm fairly certain that most D&D campaigns take place in the low to mid levels. Could be wrong, but at least most of the ones I've played in have. Like, I think the highest level character I've ever had as a player was like level 9. And granted, that wasn't 5th edition, that was Pathfinder 1st edition, but... yeah. And, you know, of the D&D games I ran, I think they only got to like level 8. So, in the first campaign I ran. You know, all the Arcadum campaigns that I watch have, you know, they go from, so far they've gone from like level 1 to level 6 tops. That's a, if you've ever watched, if you've watched Arcadum, that's a pun. I didn't mean for it to be a pun, but you know, tops is a pun. Based on its campaigns. Anyway, point is, yeah, feel like I need to differentiate the low levels of Sun Soul Monk a little more, because that's where people are most often playing. Because, frankly, the higher levels are kind of silly. Like, your wizard at level 17 gets Wish, which is pretty much just a reality warping spell that lets you do almost anything, so yeah. And honestly, that's kind of why higher level D&D campaigns don't really interest me much, because it's funnily enough, I think I can analogize this to the power creep in Naruto. The reason I like the original Naruto a lot better than I like Shippuden, or Shippuden, if you want to be correct about the pronunciation, is because in the beginning of Naruto, it was more about like, okay, how do we use the few techniques that we have to achieve victory over these enemies who are seemingly stronger than we are. Whereas later on in Naruto Shippuden, it's more like, okay, who can summon the bigger monster? And whoever does wins, right? There wasn't a whole lot of strategy to anything. It was just, I have a bigger monster than you do, so I win. And that's significantly less interesting to me. And I think actually, I wouldn't know this from experience, but it seems to me like high-level D&D is basically, you know, who has the bigger monster. Right, like, oh, you have power word kill? Well, I have wish. And it's like a true resurrection. It's like, yeah, I guess there's some counterplay there, but I mean, like, what use does I don't know, like, aid have at level 20? Just your low level spells that just don't do that much. Like, are you ever gonna use that spell again? Probably not. Okay, I'm gonna heal because I'm very scared of dying here. Yeah, I don't know. Some weird things about D&D. And I'm curious. I'm actually curious, because one of the big things that existed in Pathfinder that I'm not sure if it exists in D&D 5th edition, and I think it was probably a problem in earlier editions of D&D as well, but I think one of the things that I heard existed in Pathfinder, again, don't truly know this. Actually, I have a little bit of experience because we got at least to level 9. Oh god, I need to leave. Don't die. Okay. So I have a little bit of experience in this regard, and I kind of started to feel it. But one of the things that people often said about Pathfinder, 1st edition Pathfinder anyway, was that the caster classes hugely outscale the martial classes. That is, you know, the classes who are more based on magic are much stronger in the late game than the ones that are based on, you know, using swords and shields and such. And yeah, with my level 9 character, I kind of started to feel that, right? I got like lightning bolt and fireball, and those were dealing a crap ton of damage. I was like, wow, this is really cool. And then meanwhile, you know, the fighter or the monk of the party is still doing like, it's like 2d10s in a round, where I'm dealing like, oh yeah, this is 8d6. It's a lot better damage. Yeah, that was a problem in 1st edition Pathfinder, and I'm curious if that is true in 5th edition. Because I really haven't even seen any sort of mid to high level 5th edition play. because thinking about, you know, what I've watched of 5th edition and what I've played of 5th edition, which is to say what I've DM'd of 5th edition because I haven't actually played it as a player. But thinking about what I've watched and what I've done as a DM in this edition of the game, this current campaign that I'm running, the players in the party is level 3. Arcadum's campaigns, which are most of what I've watched of 5th edition, I think the highest I've seen there is like level 6. And I know there are campaigns where they got higher than that, but oh, maybe they're like level 7 or 8 by the end. But yeah. And then I watched like maybe like a half dozen episodes of Critical Role, like the first 6 I could find or so, and they weren't especially high leveled there. I don't know that I've actually watched any other 5th edition. I've definitely watched some Pathfinder aside from that, but not 5th edition. Yeah, so the point is, I haven't exactly even seen what 5th edition Pathfinder looks like at mid to high levels, so I'm curious. I'm just really curious if it's still the case that, yeah, mages are just better at higher levels, because it seems like, just from reading the books, it seems like they definitely tried to make martial classes better later in the game than they were in previous editions, because there's stuff like one of the reasons that martial classes kind of don't scale particularly well is because they don't have a lot of variety in their damage types, typically, and especially with other versions of the game aside from 5th edition. And when you get into the later game, you fight more enemies that have resistances to certain types, and some of the most common resistances are resistances to physical damage, which are pretty much most of what a fighter does. You know, a fighter or a barbarian or a monk. So, one thing they seem to have done to combat that, pun fully intended. Come on. There we go. Okay, we hit the level. There's a level in attack. Cool. So one of the things they seem to have done to combat that is to give the martial classes some way of treating their physical attacks as magical, or giving them other damage types that they can use later in the game. And I think that's pretty cool, but I'm curious to see if it actually solved the problem rather than just making it slightly less obvious. But speaking of problems that are obvious, we're probably going to run into some pretty obvious problems next time. But as for this episode, that's a wrap. We'll see what we can do next time.